should have ended up together. We should have had a huge smashing affair. But there was no time, and Julie had her children with her, which is most inconvenient, I thought.
When the world fell in love with the sound of music in 1965, audiences couldn't ignore the undeniable spark between Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. Was it merely scripted romance, or something far more profound, quietly unfolding behind the scenes? For decades, they kept their hearts and feelings guarded, until Christopher Plummer, before his death, finally shared what really existed between them. Their story is not one of scandal or drama, but a poignant and unspoken bond that shaped both their lives beyond the cameras. What they shared defied easy labels, neither just friendship nor conventional romance. Plummer's final admissions. In his later years, Christopher Plummer's reflections on his connection with Julie Andrews grew more candid and heartfelt, offering insights that had long been withheld from public view. Far from the sarcasm and guardedness he once favored, his voice softened when speaking of her, revealing a depth of feeling shaped by time and experience. Friends who spent time with him during these final years noticed how often her name came up, and with it, a tenderness that hinted at unspoken truths. Plummer admitted that he had joked for decades about his role in The Sound of Music, sometimes pretending to resent the film's sweetness. But beneath that humor was a profound gratitude. He confessed that the film had given him something irreplaceable: Julie Andrews' presence. Without her, he said quietly, the movie wouldn't have worked. She made him better, not just as an actor, but as a man approaching the end of his story. When a biographer asked what The Sound of Music truly meant to him, Plummer paused long before confessing that it was far more than just a career milestone. His eyes would go distant, and he spoke with the sincerity of a man who understood the real gift that the film and Andrews had given him. It was not fame or fortune, but a rare bond, a kind of connection that kept on surviving beyond scenes and scripts. Even when his health started to wane, Plummer kept her close in spirit. Letters and flowers from Andrews helped brighten his last days, with notes that his wife would read aloud right beside his bedside, almost like a ritual. One caretaker remembered his smile when he heard Julie's name, like he was quietly murmuring, "Tell her she was my favorite." And somehow it sounded simple, really, as if there was nothing else to add. There was no grand flourish in it, not exactly, just that quiet truth of a man who spent a lifetime guarding the depths of his own heart. Publicly, Plummer stayed a little elusive, sometimes joking about falling in love with Maria instead of Julie. But those who knew him could still see through the easy, light-hearted mask. In private, he spoke about her as the rarest of women, someone too precious to waste, to gamble away by overstepping the line. When someone asked why he never went after a fuller romance, he just shook his head and said, "Because what we had was untouched, and I wanted it to stay that way." That whole confession reshaped the feeling in him, a love that became steadier, not loud, not possessive, but enduring and respectful. He treated their bond like something sacred, a calm constancy that didn't require any bright display or public declaration. It was love that lived in admiration and gratitude, an unspoken reassurance that seemed to carry him through the years, almost like a lantern you don't notice until the room gets dark. The quiet constancy of their connection would echo long after the final curtain, a testament to a bond that needed no words to endure, the beginning of a unique connection. From the moment Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews met on the set of The Sound of Music in the summer of 1964, something uncommon and quietly electric sparked between them. Plummer was a seasoned stage actor known for his wit and skepticism, initially reluctant to take on the role of Captain Von Trapp. Julie Andrews, fresh from her success in Mary Poppins, was radiant, professional, and eager to shed her Disney image. Their personalities seemed almost opposite. His dry humor and guarded nature contrasted sharply with her warmth and optimism, but it was precisely this difference that created an immediate magnetic tension. Crew members later recalled how, even in rehearsal, the two moved with a familiarity and ease that felt more like old friends reuniting than actors merely learning lines. There was an unspoken rhythm to their interactions, a silent conversation that bypassed verbal exchange. Julie's open warmth began to soften Christopher's sharp edges, while his intensity and penetrating gaze intrigued her. That first meeting wasn't just a beginning of a film partnership. It laid the groundwork for a profound personal connection that neither fully understood at the time. As cameras rolled, this undeniable connection didn't just survive, it deepened. The famous ballroom scene in the film captured more than just scripted chemistry. It revealed genuine emotion passing between them. Plummer later admitted he was startled by how real the feelings became, that it was not just the character losing control, but himself swallowing up by the moment. Watching that scene, audiences sensed something authentic beneath the polished surface, a smile that lingered, a stillness filled with meaning, and the kind of breath intake that only true emotion can produce. During filming, their bond kinda quietly strengthened as well, behind the scenes or whatever. In those long waits for the right lighting or the weather to finally behave, they'd end up sitting side by side, sharing songs, and then some teasing at the piano too. Julie's laugh, as Plummer put it, a trumpet of sunshine, would cut right through his usual sarcasm, and then you'd hear the teasing comments start up again, plus laughter that seemed to go way past the script. Even if on-set things looked playful and amicable, underneath it, there was this deeper admiration going on, a low-key shared realization that they were kind of exploring rare emotional ground together. Still, despite the closeness, there was this careful awareness of boundaries. Both knew they were inside a cinematic story, yet the energy that moved between them felt like it existed beyond roles or lines. Their connection turned into this unseen thread, holding together a lot of their performances. Subtle, but somehow it still showed up for cast and crew, then later for millions of viewers worldwide. They never fully said what was growing. Not in plain terms, but honestly, everyone could see the outline of it, a quiet truth that gave their work more depth and also kept a little mystery in their bond. By the time filming finally wrapped, what started as a professional collaboration had changed into something a lot more meaningful. Christopher would later describe it like a golden summer he never forgot, while Julie called Plummer her partner in mischief. But those lines kinda covered the real thing, the start of a lasting bond that wasn't brief or forgettable. It was a connection neither of them could really label, but it would stick around, long after the cameras stopped rolling. As the days grew colder and filming moved to more intimate settings, the unspoken tension that had drawn them together began to quietly intensify. On-set moments that sparked rumors. Filming The Sound of Music was as much about the actors' relationships off-camera as it was about their performances on screen. Away from the spotlight, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews found comfort in each other's company as the cast settled into their rhythm amid the picturesque Austrian countryside. Shared moments between takes, small acts of care and playfulness, became reflections of a deeper emotional closeness that did not go unnoticed by those around them. Simple gestures sparked whispers among the crew. Julie would fix the lapel of Christopher's costume with a gentle touch, or he would tuck a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. These were not grand or rehearsed moves, but instinctive expressions of care that hinted at feelings beyond friendship. The director's call of cut couldn't erase the lingering silence between them, moments where their eyes met and held longer than scripted, as if sharing a secret too fragile or complex to voice. Their playful teasing, such as exchanging quips about his grumbling or her bright laughter, was underscored by a tenderness few outside their circle perceived. In private, their conversations would drift to music, theater, and family, revealing a vulnerability rare among Hollywood stars. To outsiders, it looked like a blossoming friendship, but for those who worked closely with them, it was clear the bond was something more intricate, an emotional intimacy that hovered between them quietly yet powerfully. The intimacy deepened, kind of weirdly, against the film's most pivotal scenes. During breaks, the atmosphere between them felt charged, but also held back, like they both were waiting for the right beat to talk or, act on what was sitting there in plain sight. Those moments made rumors sprout, that the world saw only the surface, like the acting was just part of it, and not the whole truth. There was a genuine bond, fueling their performances somehow. Even those weary hours of long shoots didn't really dull the affection they showed, at least not completely. When the rain came down hard during the filming of Something Good, and both were wiped out, this deeper emotional undertow showed up. Plummer later said he felt this lump in his throat, not because of the song, but because something in Julie's eyes had stirred him, like a sincere and delicate presence that was way beyond the character. That subtle honesty became this strong engine, driving their scenes and also making their real-life dynamic a bit more complicated than anyone would guess. Rumors moved around quietly anyway, crew members whispering about their on-set chemistry and off-camera closeness. Still, Christopher and Julie kept a careful kind of balance, knowing that public acknowledgement could tilt everything. They both seemed to understand the risk of scandal and the fragility of their friendship, especially with the industry watching and the media hovering like it never really leaves, despite the curiosity and all that speculation that hung around them. Neither Plummer nor Andrews publicly confirmed anything. Instead, they stayed playful and guarded, letting the work speak for the feelings simmering right under the surface. Their silence, in a way, added to the mystique and that quiet allure, leaving audiences and colleagues alike wondering what the true story was behind the scenes and all that. As the personal pressures around them mounted, these secret exchanges became a lifeline, revealing the depth of what was left unspoken. The emotional depth behind key scenes. Some of the most iconic scenes in The Sound of Music captured more than just a scripted romance. They revealed the real emotional currents flowing between Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. Take the ballroom sequence, where the camera lingers on the captain taking Maria's hand, and suddenly, everything else fades away. That moment was magic, not because it was scripted perfectly, but because Plummer allowed himself to be genuinely affected. He later admitted that the feeling surprised him. It was not just his character's emotion, but his own breaking through the role. Julie Andrews, throughout the film, maintained a quiet grace that balanced the intensity he brought. She never blurred the boundary between character and reality, yet the tenderness between them rang true. Those watching on set noticed how their energy shifted when they were together, lighter, more focused, and sometimes mischievous. Their connection enriched the cinematic experience, making scenes resonate with an authenticity that transcended performance. The filming of Something Good under a rain-soaked gazebo crystallized this emotional depth. Both actors were worn out from long hours and harsh weather, yet when they began singing, the exhaustion melted away. Plummer confided that the lump in his throat came not from the scene itself, but from the sincerity he saw in Julie's eyes. To the audience, Maria's falling for the captain was a tender love story, But behind the cameras, it was a fragile, real exchange, one they retreated from in silence after every take. This layered dynamic gave the film, well, its heart. Their performances carried a truth that even they sometimes found unsettling, if I'm being honest. The vulnerability in those scenes wasn't just acting. It was a kind of reflection of that rare emotional terrain they were crossing together, quietly, privately. It was an intimacy the world never really got to see all the way, but it still profoundly shaped the film's staying power and enduring appeal. The crew would often mention these tiny little pauses and stolen glances that lasted way longer than a scripted beat ever really needs. Those wordless exchanges held volumes, tension, hesitation, affection, things no words could fully hold. It felt like a dance of restraint, where emotions came up just enough to give the characters force, but were kept back from crossing the carefully guarded boundaries. And then, the emotional complexity sort of deepened as filming went on, especially as their personal lives and the roles began to overlap. The scenes became more than storytelling. They were a canvas for feelings that were too complicated to label out loud. What the audience saw as a flawless performance was really the result of two actors tangled up in both fiction and reality, at least in that specific kind of way. Even with exhaustion and production pressures pressing in, Plummer and Andrews seemed to find in those moments a rare pocket of space to express something essential, yet somehow never fully spoken, that would end up defining their connection forever. So yeah, it was that hidden depth that made the performances timeless and, honestly, hard to forget. The complexity of those emotions might have remained bottled beneath the surface if not for the personal crossroads both were silently facing during that summer of filming. Personal lives and emotional crossroads. During the filming of The Sound of Music, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews found themselves at significant crossroads in their personal lives, intensifying the emotions simmering between them. Plummer, in his mid-30s, was newly married yet restless, still striving for artistic seriousness and grappling with the pressures of his career in theater and film. Julie, on the other hand, was balancing early fame with the demands of new motherhood, often taking spontaneous moments during the day to call home and connect with her infant daughter. Their contrasting life stages and commitments added layers of complexity to their burgeoning bond. Away from the cameras, their connection grew in quiet moments of shared relief and companionship within the overwhelming demands of the production. Plummer's rough wit softened in Julie's presence, while her warmth was tempered by the weight of responsibility she carried. Long hours on set, coupled with the isolation in an unfamiliar place, pushed them closer as they came to depend on each other for comfort and understanding. This reliance was subtle but deep, a mutual emotional support that neither fully acknowledged but both deeply valued. The Austrian setting itself, the old abbeys, the lush hillside meadows, created an intimate backdrop that framed their evolving relationship. As the cast became a tight-knit family, Plummer and Andrews often drifted into their own world, playing off each other's personalities in ways that surpassed mere friendship. He would pretend to grumble about the endless songs while cigarette in hand, and she'd respond with eye rolls and gentle humming, drawing him into a shared unspoken game that lightened the long, tiring days. This ritual became a comforting constant amidst the physical and emotional demands of filming. Their awareness of the fragile nature of what was growing between them was keen. Neither was naive about the potential consequences of crossing personal and professional lines. The tension was charged with the possibility of something far more than friendship, an affection that could easily slip into romantic territory. Yet both lived with the knowledge that public perception and personal commitments could make any declaration or action risky, if not impossible. The crew started to catch on to these tiny signs, careful touches, lingering glances really, moments where professionalism sort of slid into something more. During breaks, Julie would fix the lapel on Plummer's coat, or he'd lightly move a stray lock of hair away from her face. It felt instinctive, small, but it still gave you that look beneath the characters, like you could see the real emotional layers trying to breathe under all that acting. And it was in those unguarded little pauses that their actual connection really showed up. Tender, but held back, like neither of them wanted to push it too far, even in private. Both actors knew exactly what was at risk. Julie was a married woman and a mother. With this public image, she kept polished, steady. Plummer, meanwhile, was dealing with the complications of a new marriage and a demanding career that never really let up. So for each of them, the idea of scandal, or even just getting misread, was a heavy thing. Christopher was especially worried about losing the friendship that had anchored him during a rough stretch. He kept his feelings tucked away, channeling all that into the role, but in real life, he never fully said it, not out loud, not really. Still, beneath the unsaid lines, their bond became the emotional motor for what the audience saw on screen. Viewers called it chemistry, like it was effortless, but it was more than that. It came from a real and complicated rhythm between two people balancing hearts, careers, and lives that kept shifting. It was kind of a shared secret. Their friendship and affection fed quietly in the gaps between duty and desire, in that in-between space where everyone else probably wouldn't think to look. Their story's fragile beauty was echoed in the careful boundaries they both maintained, choosing silence when words might have broken the delicate balance. The unspoken relationship. Though the intensity of Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews's connection was palpable, both chose to protect it by wrapping their feelings in silence and subtlety. The fear of scandal, professional repercussions, and personal heartbreak created invisible fences around the bond they shared, making their relationship something unspoken but deeply felt. Rather than risking the fragility of their friendship, they let their connection live quietly in the spaces between words and actions. The tacit agreement to hold back allowed them to preserve what they valued most, a rare, enduring intimacy that transcended the usual definitions of romance or friendship. They understood that giving voice to their feelings might change everything, potentially shattering the trust and safety they had built. This restraint required immense emotional discipline, especially in an environment as scrutinizing as a high-profile film production. Their silences became a form of communication, a way to confess without speaking, to share without declaring. After intense scenes like Something Good, they would retreat to separate corners, avoiding conversation about the emotions that had surfaced. The tension between them was often summed up in these quiet, mutual retreats, which carried more meaning than any spoken confession. Their friendship existed in a delicate balance, shaped by what was said and unsaid. Julie's whole public, like her gracious wife and mother vibe, kinda made it harder for them to explore the relationship openly. She kept this image of grace and steady ground, and she was careful not to mess it up. Same time, Christopher's cautious nature meant he was, hesitant about risking the professional and personal stability he'd built piece by piece. And both of them seemed to understand the real fallout that a more exposed, deeper thing could trigger, not just for them, but for people they cared about too. In interviews and those public appearances over the years, they stayed playful and slightly evasive whenever anybody asked. They'd dodge, mostly with humor or that kind of soft teasing, like it was nothing at all. Christopher called Julie practically perfect, while she laughed about his sarcasm. Their back and forth felt close, but also like they were choosing not to fully show it. So it was this word, dance, that kept the mystery on purpose, letting the deeper truths sit close to the heart without ever being laid out. What they had was unusual. Not in some dramatic, big headline way, but it was different from most connections. Nobody really had to pin it down for it to make sense to the people watching. It was like a quiet constancy, a warm presence that kept surviving through decades, careers, and distance that showed up in real life. The love there didn't really need those huge gestures or loud declarations. It just kind of grew, fed by mutual respect and affection, and kept going because they kept choosing it. The delicate balance they maintained allowed their relationship to endure silently, even as their lives moved onward, carrying with it the promise of something enduring beyond convention, lifelong friendship, and occasional reunions. Over the decades that followed The Sound of Music, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews maintained a friendship that transcended time, distance, and the shifting tides of their careers. Despite living separate lives and pursuing different paths, Plummer continuing his diverse acting career and Andrews balancing fame with family, they remained connected by an invisible thread woven in their shared past. Their bond was not a loud or dramatic one, but a steady current that quietly endured, offering warmth and familiarity whenever they crossed paths again. These reunions, whether at awards ceremonies, film festivals, or private dinners, carried a unique sense of ease and recognition. Witnesses often remarked how the room seemed to pause when they embraced, as if time itself hesitated to interrupt their connection. Their interactions blended humor and tenderness. Plummer's teasing jests met with Andrews's radiant laughter, followed by a silent moment full of meaning, reminiscent of their early days on the Austrian set. That familiar pause was a language understood only by them, a confidential echo of a bond that had never faded. Their continued correspondence also reflected this enduring closeness. Letters and postcards traveled between them, often light-hearted, yet rich with genuine affection. Plummer signed his notes as "Your devoted captain," while Andrews replied with brief, poignant messages like, "Thinking of you." These exchanges were small acts of devotion kept private from the world, preserving their connection through time and silence. The warmth and wit in their letters conveyed a friendship rooted in deep respect and unspoken understanding. As both actors aged, their connection kind of matured into this thing that was publicly acknowledged but also privately treasured in a way. In interviews during later years, they would kind of hint at their bond with gentle smiles and these playful remarks, and they never really fully revealed the depth of it. Still, they never denied it either. Plummer once described working with Andrews as the best decision he ever made, which sounds simple enough, but it felt casual and deeply sincere at the same time. His eyes often gave away the depth of feeling that words just can't hold, especially when he was speaking of her in those quiet moments away from the spotlight. Andrews, in her own manner, carried a quiet loyalty too. Even with the losses and heartbreaks that marked parts of her later life, including her husband, Blake Edwards, her affection for Plummer never wavered. When his name came up, her face would light up and her voice would turn softer, like it was reserved for the kind of memories that matter most. People close to her noticed she wouldn't let others speak of Plummer dismissively. She saw him as more than a co-star, more like a steady witness who had been there and supported her when she was at her most vulnerable, not just on set, but in spirit. This enduring friendship set the stage for Plummer's later reflections, where past and present converged in unexpected and revealing ways. Julie Andrews's quiet devotion. Throughout the decades following The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews exemplified a steadfast devotion to Christopher Plummer that went beyond the bounds of ordinary friendship. Despite the public's curiosity and numerous speculations, Andrews maintained a quiet loyalty that spoke volumes in the moments when she mentioned him. Her reverent tone and softening smile whenever his name arose revealed how deeply she valued the connection they shared, even if it remained mostly unspoken. Friends close to Andrews noticed how protective she was of Plummer's memory and reputation. She never allowed anyone to dismiss or trivialize their relationship, standing firmly against reductive labels like difficult co-star or mere colleague. To her, Plummer was the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable, young, uncertain, and balancing a rising career with the demands of a growing family. This intimate understanding created a bond of unwavering respect and affection that time could never diminish. Even as life brought personal losses and profound challenges, such as the passing of her husband Blake Edwards, Andrews carried the memory of her closeness with Plummer as a treasured constant. Their connection was a source of quiet strength, an invisible anchor she held on to when facing life's storms. This enduring loyalty was not defined by public appearances or grand statements, but by a steady presence in her heart that shaped how she viewed her own story. Andrews and Plummer reunited on stage during milestone anniversaries of The Sound of Music, moments that were celebrated by fans, yet marked privately by deep personal significance. They clasped hands and smiled with a familiarity that hinted at a shared history impossible to fully articulate. There were no forced performances in those interactions, just two souls reflecting a connection that never truly faded, no matter how much time had passed. What Andrews said about Plummer, sort of, in a way that you could feel it, showed this profound kind of recognition of how specific their relationship really was. She described him as someone who made her laugh, and, maybe even more so, made her feel properly noticed, like truly seen. Those simple, still strong little feelings painted the size of the affection and understanding between them. And yeah, that kind of thing is rare even when people are close friends. Their relationship, too, was kept quietly under wraps. It lived in the pauses and quick looks, in the small gestures that carried so much weight for them, but almost nothing to outsiders. Andrew's dignified restraint respected what they had without yanking it into the public view. She kind of embodied a love that stayed alive in recollection and in those unspoken truths. That sort of subtlety, it suggested patience and acceptance, the idea that some connections go beyond labels or social confirmation. Their story reminds us that some bonds are defined not by public declarations, but by quiet loyalty and shared memories. The connection between Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews was a rare and enduring gift, lived in the spaces between friendship and love. If you found this story moving, please like and subscribe for more heartfelt tales from Hollywood's hidden histories.